The umbrella man. All of us who travel gain experiences, many of which we treasure for life. But have you ever encountered something so unsettling that it leaves you questioning your reality? Something that stays with you, lurking in the recesses of your mind, yet too eerie to openly discuss? If your answer is no, consider yourself lucky, because there are people who have brushed against things far darker than they'd ever imagined, experiences that chilled them to their very core. You still don't believe it? Well, you might change your mind after hearing these unnerving encounters, including one that took place at a popular tourist destination, an encounter with the Umbrella Man. It was a holiday from school, and my friend and I had planned to unwind at Mall Road, the bustling heart of the hill town. We decided to indulge ourselves with some snacks, soak in the cool evening air, and simply take it easy. However, time slipped away from us. By the time we finished roaming the lively streets and sipping coffee at our favorite spot on the ridge, the clock had already ticked past 7 p.m. After sharing a plate of hot, steaming momos, we decided it was time to head back. By then, the crowd had thinned, and the atmosphere on Mall Road had shifted from the cheerful hustle of tourists to a quieter, more subdued calm. It was already 9 p.m. when we parted ways, and I began my solitary walk back home. A soft drizzle began to fall just as I reached a quieter part of the road. The street was deserted, save for the occasional flicker of a streetlight casting long, eerie shadows. I remember the sound of my footsteps echoing off the cold pavement lay interrupted only by the gentle patter of raindrops. The shops had long since closed, and the once bustling streets now lay empty, as if the world had quietly retired for the night. As I continued, something caught my eye. Up ahead, a man with an umbrella was walking at a steady pace, his silhouette blurred by the rain. The rhythmic movement of his umbrella, bobbing up and down, seemed oddly hypnotic. I thought to myself, maybe I should catch up to him. It'd be nice to share an umbrella and some company on this lonely walk. So I picked up my pace, walking a little faster. Strangely, no matter how much I hurried, the distance between us didn't seem to close. His pace matched mine perfectly, as if he was deliberately staying ahead. A sense of unease began to creep in, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks in the rain-soaked night. Determined, I called out, "Hello!" "Excuse me." My voice echoed through the stillness, but the man didn't stop. I began to jog, trying to catch up. Finally, I shouted again, louder this time. He turned around. I froze. The man must have been in his late 60s, his face illuminated briefly by a distant streetlight. But what sent a chill down my spine wasn't his age. It was the fact that despite holding an umbrella, he was completely soaked. His clothes clung to his body, drenched as if he had walked straight out of the rain without a care in the world. The umbrella offered him no protection, almost as if it was there merely for show. My steps faltered, and a cold shiver ran through me. The man stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his eyes empty, as though he was looking through me rather than at me. Then, without a word, he turned and resumed walking. Only this time, something was different. His footsteps, which had once been in sync with mine, now seemed slower, almost deliberate. I slowed down. So did he. The growing dread in my chest was suffocating. Every instinct told me to stop, to turn back, but I couldn't. My feet felt like they were moving of their own accord, matching his every step. The road stretched on endlessly, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I came to a dead stop, heart pounding in my ears, and so did he. Complete, suffocating silence. I wanted to run, scream, do something, but I was rooted to the spot. My breath hitched in my throat, and fear gripped me tighter than ever before. That's when I heard it. A siren, loud and jarring, breaking the stillness like a lifeline. A police vehicle pulled up behind me, its headlights flooding the road with light. 2 officers stepped out, their faces twisted in concern. "What are you doing out here alone?" one of them asked. My voice trembled as I tried to explain what had just happened, about the man with the umbrella, how he had been walking just ahead of me. The officers exchanged a look, one I couldn't quite decipher, before one of them shook his head. "You were alone," he said, his tone firm. "We've been patrolling this stretch for the last hour. There's been no one here, no man with an umbrella." I stared at them in disbelief. "But I saw him," I insisted. "He was right there." The other officer sighed, his expression softening. Maybe it's the rain or exhaustion getting to you. Sometimes people see things in the dark they don't remember seeing in the light of day. I didn't argue. What could I say? Even as they drove me home, their words echoed in my mind, but none of it made sense. How could I have imagined something so vivid, so real? And why had the man moved in perfect sync with me, as if playing a game of shadows? To this day, I've never walked that road at night again. But sometimes, on quiet, rainy evenings, I can't help but wonder, who was the man with the umbrella, and why did he seem to vanish the moment the light shone on him? Not an earthquake. I had just arrived at Darchula after a long, tiring trek from Panchachuli. The fatigue of the day was sinking in, and all I could think of was a hot meal and a quiet place to rest. The guest house where I was staying was a simple, cozy place nestled amidst the mountains. Strangely enough, it seemed I was the only guest for the night. The solitude was both comforting and eerie. There was something about the stillness of the place, the thick blanket of mist that clung to the town, and the heavy clouds that loomed in the night sky. After a warm dinner, I retreated to my room. It was a small, tidy space with wooden floors that creaked with every step. The bed was inviting, and exhaustion took over the moment I lay down. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm almost lulling me to sleep. By 10:30 p.m., I had drifted into a deep slumber, the kind that only comes after hours of trekking in the mountains. Then in the dead of night, I was jolted awake. At first, it was subtle, a faint vibration that I could have mistaken for a dream. But then it intensified. The bed beneath me began to shake violently, as if the earth itself was shifting. Panic surged through me. I leapt out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline flooding my veins. Earthquake! That was my first thought. I reached for my slippers in a frantic rush, preparing to bolt for the door. But then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. A thick silence filled the room, so intense that I could hear my own rapid breathing. I stood there, motionless, waiting for the tremors to return, but they didn't. The only thing that filled the air was the sound of the rain pattering against the window, soft but persistent. The darkness in the room was oppressive. My hands fumbled for the switch, and when the lights flickered on, I glanced around. Everything looked as it should. Nothing had fallen, nothing was out of place. Yet, the memory of the shaking bed was vivid, etched into my mind as clear as day. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but the unease gnawed at me, and I decided to check if anyone else had felt it. Grabbing my jacket, I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cold, and the faint smell of rain hung in the breeze. The guest house was eerily quiet. I couldn't hear a single sound except the raindrops tapping against the roof. No other guests, no movement, just an overwhelming stillness that clung to the building like a shadow. As I made my way downstairs, the wooden steps creaked beneath my weight. I expected to see someone, perhaps the manager or another guest, but the place felt abandoned. When I reached the reception area, I found two of the night staff sitting on a worn-out couch, their eyes glued to a cricket match on TV. The soft glow of the screen was the only source of light in the room. Without wasting any time, I approached them. "Did you guys feel that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The bed in my room was shaking. There was an earthquake, right? The two men exchanged a puzzled glance before one of them shook his head. "No earthquake," he said casually, not taking his eyes off the screen. "We didn't feel anything." I stared at them, incredulous. "Are you sure?" The whole room was shaking. It woke me up. The second man finally turned to look at me. "We've been watching the match for the last hour," he said with a shrug. "Nothing shook here. Maybe you imagined it?" Imagined it? No, I was sure. I could still feel the phantom tremors in my bones, the sensation of the bed moving under me. It was too real to have been a trick of the mind. I thanked them and walked back up to my room, my mind racing. The rain outside had picked up, turning into a steady downpour, but it did little to drown out the unease creeping through me. As I closed the door behind me, I glanced around the room again. Everything was still. No sign of disturbance. Yet the memory of the shaking bed clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the bed shaking again, the floor rumbling beneath me. Was it truly an earthquake? If it was, why hadn't the rest of the guest house felt it? The more I thought about it, the more unsettling the situation became. There was something unnatural about the way the tremors had come and gone, like they had singled me out in that moment of solitude. The night dragged on. I sat in bed with the TV on, flipping through channels aimlessly, anything to distract me from the uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. But the sense of being watched, of something lingering just beyond my perception, refused to leave me. It was as if the very walls of the guest house were alive with secrets they weren't willing to share. When dawn finally broke, the rain had stopped. I packed my bags, eager to leave the guest house behind. As I handed over my key at the reception, the morning staff greeted me with polite smiles, completely unaware of the restless night I had endured. I didn't mention it. I wasn't sure they'd believe me if I did. As I stepped outside into the cool morning air, I took one last glance at the guest house. It stood there, silent and unassuming, as if the strange events of the night had never happened. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brushed against something unknown in the darkness, something that wasn't an earthquake, but something far more unsettling. The sea has hands. I had always been drawn to places with an air of mystery, especially those laced with spine-chilling tales. Dumas Beach in Surat was one such place, a coastal stretch infamous for its haunted history, where whispers of lost souls and strange occurrences had been passed down for generations. I'd heard the stories of people disappearing, of eerie voices carried by the sea breeze, and of restless spirits wandering the shoreline after dark. But like many, I thought these were just tales meant to scare the gullible. And yet, despite my skepticism, a part of me had to see it for myself. It was Christmas Eve last year when I finally made the trip. The beach was quiet, with only a handful of locals and tourists scattered along the sand. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the shoreline, and the cool evening breeze carried the scent of salt and wet sand. I had my camera with me, as I often did when I traveled. The fading light was perfect for long exposure photography, and I was engrossed in capturing the beauty of the sea at twilight. Waves lapped softly against the shore, their rhythmic motion almost hypnotic. It was around 7 p.m. when I first heard it, a faint cry, almost lost in the sound of the waves. I paused, lowering my camera. There were a few children who had been playing in the water earlier, splashing around without a care. I glanced towards where they had been, but most of them had already left. The beach was emptying out as the evening grew darker, and the once lively chatter had faded into the distant hum of the ocean. The cry came again, louder this time, filled with a kind of desperation that sent a chill down my spine. It was unmistakably a child. My heart raced as I scanned the water. I couldn't see anyone at first, just the vast expanse of the sea stretching out before me, dark and foreboding. Without thinking, I kicked off my shoes and waded into the water, the cold instantly biting at my legs. The sensation was startling, but I pushed forward, straining my ears to locate the source of the cries. The water was rising quickly, lapping against my waist as I moved further in. My mind raced with worry. Was a child in danger? Had someone been pulled out by the current? As I moved deeper, the cries grew louder, more frantic. I could feel my pulse quicken. The sea, once serene, now felt alive with an energy I couldn't explain. I had always respected the ocean, aware of its power, but this was different. There was something unsettling about the way the waves seemed to tug at me, urging me further in. I had to know what was happening, had to help. Suddenly, just as I was about to call out, I felt it, 2 hands, firm and cold, pushing hard against my back. The force was so unexpected, so powerful, that I lost my footing and plunged into the water. My breath hitched as I went under, salt water filling my mouth and nose. Panic surged through me, despite knowing how to swim. The ocean felt different now, less a natural body of water and more like a living thing, as if it were aware of my presence, pulling me deeper into its depths. I struggled to regain control, kicking my legs and fighting the overwhelming fear that gripped me. The cries had stopped, replaced by the deafening sound of my own heartbeat and the rush of water around me. My mind was racing. What had pushed me? There had been no one near me. I was certain of that. And yet, the sensation of those hands shoving me into the sea was vivid, as real as the cold water that now surrounded me. Somehow I managed to push myself to the surface, gasping for air. But as I tread water, I realized just how far I had drifted from the shore. The beach was distant, much farther than I had thought. How had I ended up so far out in such a short time? The shore, with its flickering lights and scattered figures, seemed impossibly far. The panic surged again, but I forced myself to swim, each stroke a desperate attempt to reach the safety of the sand. When I finally staggered back onto the beach, panting and trembling, I collapsed onto the wet sand, my body shaking from a mix of exhaustion and fear. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, staring up at the darkening sky, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The cries had stopped. The beach was eerily quiet, with only the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. I sat up, looking out at the sea. The water was calm now, as if nothing had happened, but I knew what I had felt. Those hands, there was no mistaking the cold, forceful grip that had shoved me into the ocean. And then there was the distance I had covered. I hadn't waded in that far, not nearly far enough to be swimming for what felt like a full minute just to get back to the shore. My mind raced with questions. Had the cries been real? Or had they been some kind of lure, drawing me out into the water? And those hands, who or what had pushed me? The sea was vast and mysterious, and as I stared out at the dark waters, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking beneath the surface, something ancient and unseen, watching, waiting. I gathered my things quickly after that, not daring to stay on the beach any longer. As I left, I glanced back one last time at the ocean. It was calm now, the waves gentle against the shore, but I knew better. The sea had hands, and it had reached for me that night. The running ghost! It was a chilly Saturday evening, and my friends in Delhi had put together an impromptu get-together at my friend Aman's place in Rajuri Garden. The late hour, almost 10:30 p.m., didn't bother me much. I was always up for these spontaneous plans. I wrapped up my work quickly, grabbed my car keys, and headed out. The roads of Delhi at night have a strange charm. Quiet, empty stretches occasionally interrupted by the glow of streetlights or a distant honk. It felt peaceful in a way. As I drove through Brar Square, the streets were almost deserted, save for the occasional vehicle speeding by. The streetlights flickered occasionally, casting long shadows across the road. I was enjoying the cool breeze and the quiet of the night when something unusual caught my eye. In the rearview mirror, a distant, flimsy figure appeared behind my car, running. At first, I brushed it off, figuring it was just a trick of the light or perhaps a pedestrian jogging in the night. I wasn't someone who got easily spooked, and Delhi was full of strange sights at odd hours. But as I kept driving, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Out of curiosity, I glanced back into the mirror and my heart skipped a beat. The figure was still there, but this time it had moved closer. It wasn't just running, it was chasing me. A chill ran down my spine, though I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just some late-night jogger, but the more I looked at the figure, the less human it seemed. Its form was hazy, almost translucent, and its movements were unnaturally fast, covering ground at an impossible speed. The streetlights cast fleeting glimpses of the figure, but every time I tried to focus on it, it seemed to blur, as though it was flickering in and out of existence. Panic began to set in as I noticed the distance between the figure and my car was shrinking with alarming speed. It was now only a few feet behind, its outline becoming clearer. Its limbs were unnervingly long, and its face, if I could even call it a face, was pale, almost featureless, except for two glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I wasn't usually the type to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but this was something else. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, and instinctively I pressed harder on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, speeding down the empty road. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my heart sank. The figure was still there, running, and it seemed like no matter how fast I went, it was keeping pace. The air inside the car felt heavy, as if the presence of that thing behind me was pressing down on my chest. I could feel my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I had to shake this off. I had to get out of here. With my pulse racing, I pressed the accelerator even harder, the engine roaring as the speedometer climbed. The city lights blurred as I sped through the streets, turning corners sharply in a desperate attempt to lose the figure. But no matter what I did, it was always there, trailing just behind me as though it was toying with me, close enough to scare, but not quite catching up. In a flash of panic, I recalled all the stories I'd heard growing up in Delhi. The stories of haunted roads, of restless spirits that chased unsuspecting travelers, never letting them go until they crossed a certain boundary or performed a ritual of some kind. But none of those tales had prepared me for this. Finally, as I neared the busy main road leading to Rajuri Garden, the traffic thickened. I hoped that the presence of other cars, people, and the general bustle would somehow break whatever spell I was under. And just like that, I looked back once more, and the figure was gone. It had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. I slowed down, my heart still pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled over by the side of the road, needing a moment to catch my breath and process the bizarre event. Was it a hallucination? A trick of the mind? Or was there really something chasing me on that quiet, lonely road? I sat there for a few moments, the sound of honking cars and the distant murmur of the city bringing me back to reality. Whatever it was over. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. When I finally reached Aman's place, I tried to laugh it off, but the lingering fear stayed with me throughout the night. The others joked, telling me I'd probably had too much caffeine or that I was just spooked from driving alone at night. But deep down, I knew something strange had happened. Even today, whenever I drive past Brar Square late at night, I find myself speeding up, unable to forget the eerie figure that had chased me through the dark streets of Delhi. Some say ghosts can't run, but I know for sure the running ghost can. The haunting at Dao Hill. The haunting at Dao Hill. After traveling solo through the breathtaking landscapes of Sikkim, I finally arrived in Darjeeling, the last destination on my trip. There was something serene yet exhilarating about the mist-covered mountains and the cool breeze that brushed through the pine trees. I had about a day and a half to explore this famous hill station, and after settling in at a cozy hotel, I felt an undeniable urge to make the most of my time. As I sipped a warm cup of tea by the window, admiring the distant peaks, the idea of exploring something offbeat crossed my mind. I had heard of Darjeeling's beauty, but I craved more than just touristy spots. After a quick chat with some locals, they recommended visiting Dao Hill in Kurseong, a lesser-known area a few hours from Darjeeling. The locals enthusiastically spoke of the scenic beauty, but their voices carried a more ominous tone when they warned me about its haunted reputation. If you're brave enough, Dao Hill has more than just mist to offer, one of them chuckled. I laughed it off, intrigued rather than scared. A supposedly haunted forest? That sounded like the perfect adventure. My curiosity overpowered any hesitation. I packed my camera bag, eager to capture some unique shots, and hired a bike to make the trip. The ride itself was a blend of tranquility and anticipation. As I rode through winding roads lined with thick trees and mist rolling down the mountains, the beauty of the surroundings was surreal. It was almost as if the landscape was preparing me for something extraordinary, or perhaps something unnerving. After a 2-hour ride, I finally reached Dao Hill. The place was stunning, no doubt about it. The forest was dense, shrouded in mist that seemed to drift like a living entity, its tendrils wrapping around the towering trees. The area was eerily quiet, with only the occasional call of birds breaking the silence. It was a far cry from the bustling tourist spots of Darjeeling, and yet it held a peculiar charm. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that I was being watched. The road leading into the forest was deserted, with only my footsteps echoing against the eerie quiet. Sparse vehicular movement and the occasional chirping of birds gave the place a haunting yet mesmerizing vibe. The mist hung low, creating an otherworldly aura that made it hard to see too far ahead, but the thrill of exploring kept me going. With my camera in hand, I began hiking through the forest, stopping every now and then to capture the mist weaving through the trees. As I wandered deeper, the eerie silence grew and the forest seemed to close in on me. The beauty of Dao Hill was undeniable, but there was something unsettling about the atmosphere. The stillness felt oppressive, as though the trees themselves were watching my every move. I crouched down to get a better angle of the trail ahead, my camera clicking away. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of eyes on me. I glanced around quickly, but saw nothing. Shaking off the unease, I lifted my camera again, focusing through the viewfinder. And then there they were. A pair of gray eyes, cold and piercing, stared right at me from the shadows beyond the trees. My breath caught in my throat as a chill ran down my spine. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mist, maybe an animal or a trick of the light. But no, these eyes were distinctly human. They were fixed on me, unblinking, as if waiting for something. Before I could react, a bone-chilling shriek cut through the silence. The sound echoed around me, bouncing off the trees and filling the air with a sense of dread. It was so sudden, so unnatural, that I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest. My heart pounded in my ears, and I instinctively looked around, but there was no one in sight. Just those eyes. Without wasting another second, I turned and bolted. My heart raced as I sprinted back toward the road, not daring to look back. The once serene forest now felt like a cage, closing in on me with every step. My mind was in overdrive. What had I seen? Was it real, or had my imagination played tricks on me? The shriek, though, was impossible to dismiss. It was too loud, too real. As I reached my bike, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples as I started the engine and sped off, the forest disappearing behind me in a blur. The air was colder now, and as I left Dow Hill behind, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, but also confusion. What had just happened? Had I encountered something paranormal, or was there a logical explanation? Even now, whenever I think of that pair of gray eyes and the blood-curdling scream, a chill runs down my spine. I never found out what or who it was, and part of me is too afraid to ever go back and find out. After attending the wedding of a dear school friend, my friend and I found ourselves exploring the breathtaking hill station of Pachmarhi. The fresh air, verdant landscapes, and natural beauty were exactly what we needed after the hustle and bustle of the wedding festivities. We spent the day marveling at the famous Pandava caves, a site steeped in history and legend, followed by a relaxing visit to Pachmarhi Lake, where we sat by the water, enjoying the serenity of the hills. As the sun began its descent, casting a golden hue over the mountains, we decided to visit one last spot, a nearby waterfall. The sound of the water crashing down, the mist rising from the falls, and the lush greenery surrounding us created a scene straight out of a postcard. But while taking in the beauty of the place, a sudden idea struck me. Why don't we explore the forest nearby? I suggested to my friend, feeling a surge of excitement at the thought of venturing off the beaten path. My friend agreed, and without much thought, we left the waterfall behind and began walking toward the forest. We had barely walked 50 meters away from the waterfall when something unexpected happened. A little girl, no more than 11 or 12 years old, appeared from between the trees. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes soiled and old, far too worn for someone visiting the falls on a picnic. She looked lost, her large eyes filled with confusion. "Where's your mother?" I asked gently, sensing that something was amiss. The girl replied in a small, trembling voice, "I came here with my mother to see the waterfall. I can't find her now." The way she spoke sent a slight chill through me, but I pushed the feeling aside. We immediately told her to stay put, assuring her we would help find her mother. Something about the situation didn't sit right with me, but I brushed it off as concern for the lost child. After all, Pachmarhi, with its dense forests and isolated spots, could easily disorient anyone. My friend and I began our search, calling out for the girl's mother as we scoured the area. We combed through the dense underbrush, venturing further into the forest, thinking perhaps the woman had wandered off or injured herself. But after 15 minutes of searching, there was no sign of her. We decided to split up, thinking we could cover more ground that way. My friend went toward the eastern side of the forest while I moved toward the west. The deeper I went into the woods, the more eerie it became. The once peaceful forest now seemed foreboding, the trees casting long, shadowy figures across the path. The quiet was unnerving, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. After what felt like an eternity, I realized that an hour had passed. Still, there was no trace of the mother. I retraced my steps, feeling a growing sense of unease as the light began to fade. It was getting dark fast, and the dense canopy above only made the forest feel more suffocating. I met my friend at the point where we had split up, both of us looking defeated and slightly shaken. "No sign of her?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the look on his face. "Nothing," he replied. "It's strange. Where could she have gone? The girl couldn't have come here alone." It was getting late, and the forest was no place to be wandering after dark. We agreed it was best to take the girl with us to the nearest police station and report her mother missing. We hurried back to the spot where we had left her, and sure enough, she was standing there, right where we had met her. But something felt different this time. She stood unnervingly still, her expression oddly calm for someone who had supposedly been lost for over an hour. When we told her to come with us, explaining that we would help her find her mother tomorrow, she simply smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You can come here tomorrow," she said in an eerie, almost rehearsed voice. "We'll try to find her again. See you tomorrow." A chill ran down my spine. The calmness in her voice, the way she said it, it was all too unsettling. My friend and I exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. The air around us seemed to thicken with an unnatural stillness, and for a moment I felt as though we were being watched by something unseen. Despite every instinct telling me to get out of there, I asked her again, more firmly this time, "Come with us. It's not safe for you here alone." But she didn't move. Instead, she simply repeated, "See you tomorrow." Without another word, my friend grabbed my arm, and we quickly left the forest, the little girl's unsettling words echoing in our minds. The walk back to the town was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That night, neither of us slept well. We couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about the whole encounter. The girl, her strange composure, the missing mother, it all felt like something out of a nightmare. The next day, we reported the incident to the local authorities, but when they checked the area, there was no sign of the girl. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that forest. Who was the girl? Where was her mother? And why did she insist on seeing us tomorrow? We never went back to find out, but whenever I think about that eerie smile and those parting words, a cold shiver runs down my spine. It was a cold January night, January 3rd, 2018, to be precise. I had spent the last few days enjoying a solo holiday in Mahabaleshwar, soaking in the serene beauty and much-needed solitude. My return to Ratnagiri had been peaceful so far. The roads were empty, the sky was clear, and I had the company of my thoughts as I navigated the winding roads under the starlit sky. The clock had just struck 10 p.m., and despite the late hour, I felt energized by the drive. There was something peaceful about driving on deserted roads, with nothing but the sound of the car engine and the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. As I approached a stretch of road near Kashedi, I noticed something unusual. There, at a small, dimly lit bus stand, was a lone woman. She stood hunched over, her figure almost blending into the darkness around her. The bus stop was completely deserted, with no vehicles in sight, and the scene was eerie in its quiet stillness. I instinctively slowed down, curiosity getting the better of me. The woman appeared to be elderly, with a small bag at her feet, which she clutched tightly as she spotted my car. As I stopped a few meters away, I saw her hastily grab the bag and start making her way toward me. There was something unsettling in her hurried movements, and an inexplicable sense of dread crept over me. A voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Don't stop. Don't wait too long." As she approached the car, I could see her more clearly now. Her face was pale, unnaturally so, and her hair was tangled and wild, as if she had been wandering for days. Her clothes were worn and dirty, and she had a haggard look in her eyes, one that spoke of exhaustion, desperation, and something I couldn't quite place. She knocked on the window gently, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the glass. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second I hesitated. She didn't look dangerous, just old, tired, and in need of help. But the feeling of unease I had felt earlier only grew stronger. "Please roll down your window," she said softly, her voice hoarse yet oddly compelling. Against my better judgment, I lowered the window slightly, no more than 2 centimeters, just enough to hear her speak. "My husband threw me out of the house," she began, her voice cracking. "I'm all alone. My family lives about half an hour from here, and I have no way of getting there. Please, can you give me a ride?" She paused, then added, as if reading my mind, "I promise I am no ghost." There was something off about the way she said it, like it was a practiced line, something meant to be reassuring, but having the exact opposite effect. Her smile, meant to comfort, only added to the growing knot of fear in my stomach. Her face was too pale, her hair too unkempt, her presence too strange for me to feel at ease. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to drive away and not look back. I couldn't explain it, but the sense of danger was palpable. I forced a polite but firm smile and lied. "I'm sorry, but I'm not going that way." As I said those words, my foot found the accelerator, and I gently pressed down, the car inching forward. I had no intention of waiting any longer. The woman's expression changed in an instant. Her smile faded, replaced by something colder, more sinister. As I drove away, her voice pierced the silence of the night. "Good decision," she yelled after me, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Her tone was filled with an unsettling amusement, as if she knew something I didn't, something terrifying. The words echoed in my mind, sending an icy chill down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I sped up, and for a brief moment I thought I saw her still standing there, watching me. Her figure grew smaller as I put more distance between us, but the eerie sensation lingered long after I left Kashedi behind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous, something otherworldly. Who was she? Why had she been standing there alone in the dead of night? And what did she mean by good decision? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. I didn't sleep well that night. Even now, years later, the memory of that encounter still haunts me. Whenever I drive through Kashedi, I can't help but think of that pale woman standing alone at the bus stop, her haunting words echoing in my mind. Good decision. I often wonder what would have happened if I had let her in. Would I have made it home that night? Or would I have become another ghost story told by travelers passing through the lonely roads of Kashedi? Have you ever had a ghostly encounter that left you stunned, whether it was a chilling apparition or an unexplained phenomenon? We want to hear your stories. Share your wildest or scariest real-life ghost experiences in the comments below. Your tale could be the next one to send shivers down our spine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.